Okay, so I guess we're up to that says the wrong thing, but we're up to Hanosen, Layaef, Koach in the Arizal's order. So we're here. Basically, and I've tried to figure this out. I have not figured it out. That is, we're going through the different Bichsa Shachar, and we had different numbers. That Arizal keeps on saying that there are 18 Bichsa Shachar, and I'm not really sure what these 18 are supposed to be. I was trying to figure that out today. And I don't know where he got the number 18 or why he thinks that the number. I mean, I know he's pshat in the number 18. It's a nice pshat, so he makes it correspond to 18 brachas of Shemin Esra and 18 havayis and yichavoid, 18 havayis and shira sayam, which is generally matches with what I was saying last time, that Bichsa Shachar has some kind of mini tefillah, so it's like 18 is like we have Shemin Esra brachas for the Amidah. But it doesn't really add up his count to of 18. In other words, the way the Rashash and I guess this is the Arizal not counted up to 18 was to say that there are 3 prior to 18, like we keep on discussing, Kesechach Nadina, which are Alatlas Yadayim, Ashiyatzar, and Elohai Neshama, and then another 18 which are from Hanes Lasach Vina until the end of Brichas HaTorah. Now this is kind of weird because Brichas HaTorah has nothing to do with Brichot HaShachar, just a bracha on the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. We might have a minute to say it in the morning for whichever reason, but it's definitely not connected to Brichas HaShachar. Therefore, I don't really know. And there's also not really 3 Brichas HaTorah, there's really only 2. Because the first one is just a long bracha, which starts and ends with Burech, so I don't really know how we got to 3. The more plausible way would be to include the first 3 in the 18, which the Arizal seems to say sometimes, and then the Rashash tries to change the gears. So we saw earlier he said 18 brachas which start at Anatlas Yadayim, and I'm not really sure why that might make more sense if we have to use the 3, which the Arizal says are Kesachach V'Bina, but I don't know why that doesn't necessarily have to be a contradiction with his remez of 18. Unless he says openly that Bichas HaTorah is one of the 18, I don't see him saying that, because I don't think he discusses Bichas HaTorah at all in this drush. So therefore, I'm not. Yeah, that's one comment about the 18 number. It should not include Bichas HaTorah. It should start from Anatlas Yadayim, and then you have 18, which at least have some connection with Brichot HaShachar. The other comment they had about that was that apparently the number 18 comes from the Rambam, which in Hilchas Tefillah, I think it was Perek Zayin, he talks about the Bichas HaShachar, and he says these 18 brachas, whatever, you have to only say them if you actually happen to you, because the Rambam holds that you don't say them. It's not Menogish L'Olam like we were discussing. That's different Rishonim that hold like that. Rosh, I think, but the Rambam is of the opinion that if you don't have shoes, you don't say Shastalik al Tzarki. If you didn't sleep, you don't say Pekach Ivrim, and so on. And he uses language 18 brachas. Now, when you count the Rambam, apparently there's only 17 Bichot HaShachar. And that is because the Rambam does not have this bracha of Anatin Layaef Koach, which we're going to discuss now. So apparently when the Rambam says 18, he is including the bracha that he started the chapter with, which is the bracha of Hamapil, which is for before you go to sleep at night. But when he says these 18 brachas, all he's just saying the ones that I've discussed in this chapter, but he does not say that there are 18 brachas. At least that's how I counted. And maybe I looked in the Mefarshim, nobody seemed to like enumerate.
What about, if we're talking about brachas, you're saying between waking up and praying, there's a bracha on tefillin there, and tzitzit also.
Yeah, so those Yeah, good question. Arizal could have in his system he could have put them in, but he definitely those are definitely just brachas on like the mitzvah, right? You would say that if you would put tefillin on tefillin in the afternoon, you say it too. It's like very hard. Although the Arizal would like explain, like we keep on discussing, the Arizal would put tzitzis and tefillin into the structure of tefillah and explain it, but I don't think anyone tries to like include that in this order. Like it's not. Yeah, it's true that it's.
And going from that thought also, where does the bracha on tefillin itself fit in when you're saying Otesa b'tifara and
So that's well, I don't know. Let me see. He doesn't discuss those brachot right here, but
if you're taking the format that you're saying the brachas as you're doing the things, then what you say, you know.
Yeah, so the Al Pip Shot, that's a drash. In other words, there was the Rash or someone that said that you should be that Oter Yisrael b'tifara has to do with tefillin, but it actually has to do with your hat or your kapo or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So the Rambam and maybe the Gemara, where they say that you say them as you're doing it, they say when you put on your hat, you say this, and when you put on your gartel, you say as you say.
Right.
You know. It's not the tefillin connection was made by people a long time ago, but it's not doesn't seem to be the simplest.
Not the original. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's what I've seen about this 18. So, yeah. I'm having an echo. Is it me or? No. Now, I keep on having this echo thing. They're both mute, so I don't know. So that's all. So now we got, so he's going, I don't think this is the correct order. In other words, Layaef Koach should be the first. Is that what they do? No, right? It's not the first, but he doesn't actually have Hakavanos here in each of them, at least not specific ones, only on a few of them. So I don't think it's any specific order. But first he gives us his opinion about this bracha, which is Layaef Koach. And he says, Nachon la'amra, v'achat min 18 brachot ha'ele shedeknu kodem ha'tfilah. ואף על פי שיש מוחין בדבר זה, עם כל זה ראוי לאמרה על כל פנים, וכמו שנבאר סודה, בעזרת השם. So, the moichin b'davar zeh is one guy known by the name of Rabbi Yosef Karo, which was not happy with this bracha because he said it doesn't say in the Talmud. And the Torah brings this bracha as he quotes all the brachot hashachar that are found in the Gemara. And then he says in the Sidrei Ashkenaz, and they have another bracha, maybe another two, but the other one we don't say. And the one is Anoten Layaef Koach. And he has some controversy. He doesn't seem to have such a problem with the Torah and in general, the Ashkenaz people, but the Bet Yosef right away says what's going on. If it does no source in the Talmud, how could you say it? So he had an assumption that you're not allowed to make up new brachas, which is something that I critically would say, well, is this halacha something that says in the Talmud? Because if you're so into only following the Talmud, you have to at least find the source in the Talmud to say that we're not allowed to make new brachas after the Talmud, and it doesn't say. So that halacha itself is like post-Talmudic halacha. And obviously, so there's basically two answers to this question. So if you look in the Bach and other, I forgot who else, I think the Shulchan Aruch, they have different ways of getting out of the Rabbi Kara's problem, and therefore, in any case, he seems to have come up with this issue. Like earlier, it was just like, okay, if you want, say it, but it doesn't. It's from the Ashkenazi Siddur, and then the Bet Yosef came and said, well, what's going on? If it's not in the Siddur, you're not allowed to say it, and that's how he paskened in his Shulchan Aruch. He said you should not say it, and of course, the Rama and others said, well, our minhag is to say it, and in order to answer that, they found two different excuses. So one is still assuming that you're not allowed to make up new brachas. And they said, well, you say it's not in the Talmud, but maybe it is. In other words, that's the Bach says. If we assume that we're not allowed to make up new brachas, then of course we'll assume that our forefathers who started to say this bracha didn't make it up either. So it must have been in their version of the Talmud. They must have said had this bracha. So why is the Bet Yosef even mad at us for having it? Because it doesn't say in his Gemara. Obviously, it says in our Gemara, and fine. So that's one pshat. And then the other pshat is that it's not from the Talmud, and that's no problem. That's, I think, what the Shulchan Aruch and others, and it's probably more historically accurate, although I don't actually look it up, which is they say that the Goinim made it, or whoever it was, they made a new bracha. And we kind of disagree with this whole principle that we're not allowed to make up new brachot. And there's actually more other new brachot, and there's a famous stira because the Rosh in Maseches Ksubas quotes a different bracha that everyone agrees that the Goinim made, which is a bracha for finding B'Sulim and Shetzog Egez B'Gan Eden. Anyways, and there's a controversy if you should say it, but the Rosh actually seems to be on the side that it's okay. Or not, I don't remember. Anyways, there's some controversy about that, but they basically say, well, if there's any principle, it's that you don't make up your own brachas, and that itself is controversial. But if everyone is saying something, then we don't really care if it wasn't which year it was written in. So that's the second way, and therefore, since it's our minhag, we're just going to go on and continue to say this bracha. Now, the Arizal, as in many other cases, likes the Ashkenazi way of doing things. So therefore, the Arizal disagrees with Rabbi Karo and says that he thinks we should say the bracha. And this is probably just a halachic opinion. And of course, he has also a pshat, like he has also a pshat al pi Kabbalah for it. And then therefore, since then, all the Sfardim that supposedly followed the Shulchan Aruch, they stopped following it and these kind of things because they followed the Arizal more than the Shulchan Aruch. But I'm thinking that might not be fair because the Arizal might have just said it as an Ashkenazi person, but this is like an old controversy anyways. And he says, the Arizal says, this is one of the 18 brachas that were nitkan. He seems to be saying al yedei Chazal, so he seems to be agreeing to the Bach's idea that this is actually from Takanat Chazal, and if the Bet Yosef didn't find it in his Gemara, he didn't have the right version, so find it. Wallpaper? I don't know. No idea. Yeah. And he says that this is one of the 18, so he's continuing to have this idea. And actually, if you need to have 18, then you obviously need to have this one, because otherwise there's only 17. But I don't really know if that's like a proof or what that is. So, and then you should say it, and therefore, and since it has a sod also, so he's going to. So you never know. This is always the question in these kind of things. Did he first decide al pi pshat that you should say it, and then he found a reason al pi sod, or since he had such a nice kavanah, so you couldn't give up on it. So you have to find an excuse to say, and nobody knows the answer to these kind of things. Anyways, and so that's regarding to the pshat. So now on, I saw the Shulchan Aruch says that why was it? He goes with the theory that it was a later addition, and he says why was it added? Because people became more tired after the times of the Talmud, so they added the bracha for like chilshit, like part of the Yeridus Adoros theory, like how we keep on getting worse and more tired, and so therefore we have to thank God more for giving us strength and making us untired. Anyways, but now the Arizal goes on to do something interesting, and he wants to connect this bracha of Hanosen Layaef Koach to a different, totally unrelated one, which is Malbish Arumim. And that bracha totally makes sense, and it's according to everyone from the Talmud, and it says it's a bracha for having clothing, right, for getting dressed. And the Arizal says, and these two brachas are neighbors. Well, I guess you could say them one after the other. I don't know exactly what the order should be. And they both they both have the same sod, which is very interesting. So he connected it to this, and somehow. Al pi pshat, I don't think if it's connected to something al pi pshat, I would say that it's connected to what's the last bracha? No, ma'avashenu me'ena, right? It seems to be a duplicate of that in some sense, because the halacha is when you wash your eyes or when you wash your face, you say ma'avashenu. So that seems to be a duplicate of saying Hanosen Layaef Koach. I'm not sure what the difference between these two things is even. I'm sure some pshat has a pshat. I don't know what the pshat is. But the Arizal found somewhere else to connect it. So in other words, you could say that this is an elaboration, like the Balatani's Pshat. Like, okay, we're so tired, so we're going to say two brachas on not being tired. All right. And the Arizal actually said that it's an elaboration of Malbish Arumim. And how? So how? V. Now we have to. I don't really entirely understand this whole side, but I'll say what he says. Nobody doesn't sin. Okay, it's kind of everyone. You all agree with that, right? Now, what happens when you sin? So there's all kind of bad things that happen according to Sod. All kind of bad things might happen. One thing is you did a bad thing. But besides for you having done a bad thing, there's all kind of consequences. Now, one of the relevant consequences that are important, just like the Kabbalah is always interested in what actually happens to you. So this is actually very right. So obviously, when you ask Arizal what happens when you sin, he's going to tell you that you break the yichud and atzilus, and you all kind of things like that. You put back netzitzes that were supposed to be in atzilus, you put them back in bia. In other words, what we talk about influencing the atzilus, that's usually how the Arizal talks about the real Kabbalistic way of understanding sin is usually connected with that. But and then on that, people would come and say, well, why would I care about Elam Hatzilas? Which is a very weird question, because of course they should care about Elam Hatzilas. But some people like to present, like Hasidus and so on, as saying, and it's not only some people, the Baal Shem Tov himself presented it like this. And he said, well, why would we care about something that happens in Elam Hatzilas? In other words, if the Kabbalah tells me that when I do a mitzvah, I fix the Elam Hatzilas, and when I do a Avaida, I break it, why would I care? And he always says, the Tarit says that Elam Hatzilas is in you, right? The Maggid says Hatzilas is here. And since Hatzilas is you, or is in you, therefore you should care about it. My comment on this is always that we shouldn't be so selfish. We should care about things that are not us also. Like this, the question is not a real question. And you should definitely care about God, which Hatzilas is about. So I'm not sure why people think that it's more rational or nicer or more something to interpret everything about psychology, when that seems to be it seems to be very narcissistic, like everything seems to go back to you in the end. I think we discussed this a bunch of times in different ways. Anyways, now the Arizal himself, so that's one like way of connecting it to you. Like, okay, there's like a nimshal, or there's like a consequence, which is in your own soul or in your own psychology, your own experience. The Arizal actually had his own way of connecting this to his soul. In other words, without breaking the fourth wall, right? Without getting out of the Kabbalistic language, without getting out of this world and saying that it's all a metaphor for something else, he definitely believes that it makes a difference. Besides, for whatever happens, things happen to you, not only besides, in other words, as a consequence or connected to that. And different things happen to you, right? We can discuss, for example, we could talk about the whole concept of having nefesh rach neshama chai yechida, which is to say that a person isn't born with all the parts of his soul in him. He has the potential to have them. He has, they're somehow there, but not revealed, we could say, or not actualized. And you have to do things to get chelkei neshama, nefesh rach neshama chai yechida. And if you'll do bad things, you might lose that. That's one real thing, one relevant, in other words, one personally relevant thing to talk about when you do bad things, or if you want to talk about what happens to your own soul, in the sense, which is definitely something that everyone agrees is important to care about, and it's the place where you experience everything. Now, apparently there's another, and it's obviously related to that, but there's apparently another way of talking about what happens with you when you sin, and you always do, right? Every day. This is we'll get to the difference between every day and what's real problems, but that's another point that the Arizal talks about here. So now, what happens is mafshitin me'olav levisha kadosh malbishin oisel levisha klipa atzeh kedim in mashikosev beis natzli b'nei Yisrael es edyam ונמשך עליהם זעם הנחש, כדמיין אדם הראשון שניהם בהם וידע כהרים הם, ואחר כך כסיב, וילבישם קוסנס אויר משחד החיבי. So the idea here is, there's an idea which is like this, that your soul, besides for being inside of you, as so to say, besides for having a neshama, your neshama needs to have a clothing. So just like, in other words, this is in the metaphor, just like a body needs to be enclosed, otherwise it's kind of sad, it's kind of, well, kind of poor, kind of, you can't really live in the world without appropriate garments, which garments are literal garments, and also in a certain broader sense, all the roles that you play are basically different garments that you have, right? If you wouldn't have the role to say that I'm a father or I'm an employee or I'm an employer, that those are kinds of garments, but in a more abstract sense. But also the literal ones, right? If you don't have your suit, you can't really work. You're going to be kind of disabled. So that's how the body works, the physical reality works, and the spiritual reality works in the same way. You might have a very nice soul. If you don't have ways to enclose it, you're kind of not gonna. Firstly, you're just gonna get very dirty, and you're gonna have to. You're not gonna have any protection. That's one, right? One thing that clothing gives you. It gives you protection from all kinds of dirt and rocks and stones and stuff. And the second thing it does is it gives you a way to act in the world. You cannot really live without any clothing, and your soul cannot connect with you. We could say something like this: cannot connect with you, cannot express itself if it doesn't have the appropriate garments, doesn't have fresh clothing that are working for it. And based on this, many goes back way to the beginning of all the Mekabalim. They speculated a lot about what this clothing would mean, or what kind of clothing. And they, for example, discussed the pasuk in Nun Zechariah, right? Zechariah talks about Yeshua HaKohen HaGadol, which had dirty clothing, right? The Godim Atzayim in the dream, in the Nevuah, or whatever it was that the Navi saw. And then the Malach says, take off his dirty clothing and put on clean clothing. Or we can go back to the story of Adam Rishon, where we have him noticing that he is naked. In other words, whatever was before that is kind of a good question, but we assume, and the Mekabalim assume, that he had some kind of appropriate garments before that. So we discussed the concept of kasnes oir, right? And that it says after the chet that he made him kasnes oir with an ayin, right? Leather shirt, leather clothing. I don't know if kasnes means a shirt. That's in modern Hebrew. Maybe it just means a robe or whatever. And
the tunic.
A tunic, yeah, like Iksonis of the Kohen Gadol, maybe. And we have the famous that the Zohar and others were very interested, which is how the Reb Meir Sefer Torah had the oir with an aleph, right? And we discussed that being what he was dressed in before the chet. In other words, obviously he didn't actually walk around naked. In other words, maybe he did, but in the concept, in the soul concept of it, you can't exist without some being clothed in something. It would just be, but his clothing were appropriate to it. It was clothing out of light. It was another language for clothing is really what Arizal calls kli, right? Because no art, the existence of the world is not the existence of orot, of souls by themselves, which is all the same structure. This is just different levels of the same structure, as we keep on seeing. And the whole Kisva Arizal and Kabbalah more generally is based on the idea that everything works with the same structure. There's always a body and a soul, or in other words, you could call it a clothing and a body, which are just another version, another repeat of the same kind of situation. Which means that we can't talk about Adam Rishon Kohen Machat, and actually we can't even talk about Atzilus itself, only as its light, only as its soul. We have to talk about it as having a body, as having a kli, or as having a levush. These might be different levels, but again, it's going to be just repeats of the same kind of structure, right? There's like a fractal structure to all of this, but it keeps on repeating. And therefore, based on this, we could think about the soul as having better or worse clothing. So if you're a tzaddik, if you're in the appropriate place, you will have clothing that are appropriate for you. Like the Kohen Gadol has his own clothing, and like Malachim have their own clothing, and like Odom Adishim before the Chet had their own clothing. Another very typological, another very important story is the story of the Klal Yisrael by the Mamad Har Sinai. We discussed them having crowns, right? Certain adornments, whatever these edyam literally means. Chazal interpret it to be crowns, but the Kabbalah would interpret it more generally. They had a certain level of, since they had a certain level of neshama, they had Mamad Har Sinai. They had something to get it with. They had clothing to encompass it with. And actually, the way in which the Torah tells us that they lost it is not by talking about their neshama. This is interesting because we could talk about losing your neshama, but another way of talking about it is losing your clothing that belonged to that neshama. So if I would say it became Matzah Shabbos and I took off my Shabbos shirt, I'm not only talking about the Shabbos shirt being lost, I'm talking about the Shabbos neshama Yesida being lost. But neshama Yesida needs Shabbos day clothing, and if you're wearing weekday clothing, you're not going to be able to manifest the Shabbos soul. So in other words, you have to understand that this goes together. We can't really, as far as I can tell, and this has to be, we have to look at this more closely, but when we talk about losing clothing, we're probably talking also about losing what's inside the clothing. It's all like different ways of saying, okay, you're going to remain naked. And the Zohar that the Rizal quotes talks in that language of souls that remain naked. But remaining naked for the soul, and this is the base simpler way of saying it, means remaining dead. Because a soul without a body is what we call a dead person, right? A soul outside a body, right? In other words, a naked soul is just another way of saying like a ghost, right? It's a dead person. It's a dead soul. In other words, it might not be appropriate to say the soul is dead because souls don't die, but it's this story is dead, right? This story, which is supposed to be horrifically, is dead. So therefore, it's naked. And the same way, if we talk about it, for example, we can talk about having in other words, we can talk about the body being the clothing of the soul. We can talk about the clothing expressing the soul. These are all going to be different levels of the same story. In the same sense, we could talk about having dirty clothing, which is kind of slightly different from that than being naked, but it's another way of saying you're not able to express yourself appropriately. So it's kind of, sometimes it says, the Navi says, Kitre Arom v'chisitok, right? Where Malbish Arumim, right? Well, you might have been literally naked because people used to if you sleep naked. But if it says that when it says, clothe the naked, it doesn't literally mean that poor people are walking around naked. It basically means that they're walking around without appropriate clothing, which is like, it's a kind of nakedness.
Perhaps the way to think about clothing is kind of, you were hinting to it before, it's the thing which allows you to interact with the world, the thing which allows you to express, right? So the neshama is the potential, but the body's that which allows that the neshama to be expressed, to be in actuality. Same thing with the clothing.
Yeah. I'm just thinking that it seems to be both. Since if you disconnect the clothing from the body or the body from the soul, then you kind of have a naked soul without a body, or some things that don't match. So the odd and the clear are not working together. It's a problem, right? Or we could talk about, for example, that's why I'm saying another way of saying it would be to say, for example, if you'd be in the wrong Gilgal, which you don't have to think about Gilgal, right? You could think about waking up in the wrong body. Or your body isn't listening to you today, which it should. And if it's not, that's another way of saying my clothings are dirty. Right. So now, anyways, so this is the general story, and Darizal has his entire explanations what exactly the Lavish is in Atzilus, and we have to really understand what it means. He's gonna later, in the next piece, he's gonna give us names for it, and over here also. But this is the concept, the general concept. Now, so now, and I see he's quoting the Zohar about what the Shia and so on. Okay. Now, now, depending on what happened yesterday, you're going to end up with different levels of problems. And Daizal tries to define two different levels of issues that you could have. You could have a small chet, so this famous pasuk in Parshas Azini is where the Zohar and all of the Mekabalim learned that you could make God weaker, right? We read Tzuri Latcha, you could make the Tzur Teshi, you could make him tired or weak. And I'm not really sure how this would connect to the Levishe, but he's just kind of showing you that there's sometimes that it didn't say Tzuri Latcha you killed, right? That would be another level. Or if we talk about right now, we're not talking about actually what you're doing to the Tzilus, we're talking about what would happen to your soul or to the Levish of your soul. It can get weaker, it can get like tired, basically. So sometimes you have the Levish, but it's still there, but it's kind of like the low battery. It's not working. It starts to like, you had a beep every few minutes. Now, so that's if you, just a regular day. If you really did something wrong, so you're going to lose it entirely. Now, for these two different kind of problems, we have two different kind of solutions, and to thank for these solutions, or maybe to actually create these solutions, we have these two brachas, which are the bracha of Malbish Arumim and the bracha of Hanosen Layaef Koach. So generally, what he's going to say is that Malbish Arumim is for if you lost your levish entirely, so you're going to say thank you. So somewhere in the morning we get it back. Actually, all the mefarshim are worried how exactly you got it back in the morning, but you get it back. So that would be Malbish Arumim. And then if you didn't have such a big chet, it was only a small chet, then you say Hanosen Layaef Koach. So the Layaef Koach, in other words, because who is tired? That's kind of his question. Like, who is tired? Who gets tired? Does the neshama get tired? Why would the neshama get tired? That doesn't make sense. What gets tired is the levush. Maybe the body, but maybe more accurately the levush. Now, how do you get it back? So now this is actually connected to the pshat, because when the Torah brought that we made up this new bracha. Well, he doesn't literally say we made it up, but he seems to say that he seems to agree that it was the Ashkenaz, whoever wrote the bracha, and he gives a reason for it. And he says, why do we make this new bracha of Hanosen Layaef Koach? He says because it's based on a medrash which says Chadoshim Labkurim Rabam Nasecha, and the medrash reads this pasuk as saying every morning God acts with faithfulness. Because generally, the Medrash says, generally, if I give someone a pikadon, if I give you something to hold, some of my thing, maybe also to use, I'm going to get it back used. I'm going to get it back in a worse state than I got it. And each night, people give their soul back to God, and they get it back in a better state. So Rabba Nasecha, God acts with a lot of nemunas, with a lot of faithfulness. So the opposite of if he would be if normal would be it stays the same. If you have a little less faithfulness, you shalach yad b'pikodim, then you lend someone your bike and you get it back with a flat tire. And God is the kind of person or the kind of thing where you lend him your bike and you get it back with a new coat of paint. That's chadushim lab'pikodim rabba menasecha. So each night we kind of use up our soul. Actually, in that he's going to say you're levush, because he kind of talking here for whichever reason he decided that that's the relevant level. That's because the soul doesn't really get tired and the body is just the body. So the levush, you give it back because it kind of got used up, and you get it back refreshed. You get it back rabba menasecha. That's the simple pshat. And the Arizal just takes this exact idea and makes it a little more exact in the language of Kabbalah, where he says, where do you give your neshama? To the malchus, as it says, biyotcha avkadrichna. Biyotcha means the malchus, which we have to learn exactly how, and that is Arizal's language in all the drishim of Drishim Shalamita. But biyotcha avkadrichna, when you say biyotcha avkadrichna, you may not give my soul back to the Shechina. And she, in the morning, when in the morning she gets it, she gives it back to you fresh. And in other words, we've already learned this. In other words, your neshama becomes a man for the malchus, and through that she makes a new yichud, and the yichud gives new moichin, and obviously new moichin come with new levishim. So that's how you get back your soul fresh in the morning, and with fresh clothing. So now a mission is talik men levish if you've lost you went through the day, and by the time you went to sleep you were kind of without any clothing. In the morning you have to say Malbish Arumim, you got a new one. And if you have it and it just get weaker, so she will refresh it in the sense of making it less tired, giving you more koach. And both of these things happen in the morning. I see the Shemes Hason has a whole long shuttle that he doesn't understand. It seems that Chaytaniska, if you do a big Aveda, you get a totally fresh car. And if you do only a small one, that's a really weird question. It's like saying, if you total your car, then you get a new car. But if you only break it, you stay with the old one. I mean, yeah, that's what happens. What can we do? The real question would be how, like, in what schus, and why would you get it every morning? But I think that's a better question, right? Like, if he would say, if you do tshuva, you get a nuance, and whenever you do tshuva, you could say Malbish Arumim, okay. But we don't just say it if we do tshuva, we say it just in the morning. This goes back to like what we keep on discussing, if the brachas are in something special that you have to do, or they just seder ha'olam, happens every day. And I think that this happens every day, and people don't know about this, but you don't actually have to do tshuva. Oh, no, I'm not saying. At least for small averes. It's enough to go to sleep and wake up. Now, there's two ways to read this. In other words, one is, as he says, and he seems to say it, as far as I can understand, he seems to say it. He's not talking about, if you went and you stole someone's bank account, give it back. You're not going to make brachas in the morning and say, okay, it's all good. But he's talking about en odem barat shlayechta. In other words, nobody goes to sleep with the same level of concentration that they woke up. I don't know anyone that does. If people pretend they do, then I don't trust those people, because who knows what's going on with them. It happens. You go through the whole day, and whatever. By the time you go to sleep, it's like you're not where you were when you woke up. So that's natural. We're not even talking about. It's not really a question of chet. Like it's en odem barat, it's en sadik barat shiyas shtoiv. Yes, theoretically, if it would have been, kept our meichin, kept our concentration, kept our mindfulness throughout the whole day, yeah, maybe. But it generally doesn't work like that. Most days you get tired, and you get tired spiritually. You get tired, start getting lost, start going all kind of directions, and then you go to sleep. And in the morning, and this is natural. This is for free, more or less. And in the morning, you get back your neshama, and you get back. And sometimes you really rip yourself apart, and you need to get, like it's like an entirely new person. And sometimes it's the same one from yesterday. It's just, they just did some dry cleaning on it. That's the reality. So I'm not bothered by this kasha, like how, like what's chus, like you have to do tshuva. Well, if you have to do tshuva, then you'll do that. That's one thing. The second thing, and slightly deeper than that, is that this is actually what doing tshuva means. At least if going to sleep means to you what it means to the Arizal, then going to sleep literally means giving your soul back to the Shechina. In other words, it's the biggest mitzvah you could do in your life is going to sleep. Well, not the biggest mitzvah, the biggest yichud, right? Like we discussed last man, and literally, and the Arizal talks about this. Every mitzvah you want to do is a kind of a last man. You need to give something. Give some part of yourself in a certain sense to the Shekhinah. It's like every yichud. You can't, nothing happens for free in this world. This world and all other worlds have, everything has a price. And the yichud has a price. If you want to have love, you have to pay for it. You have to get, nothing just comes to you for free. That's not how, and even physical reality has a price for everything. If there's a motion, there's a counter motion. There's nothing is free. And therefore, the Arizal is very worried about this in different contexts, how we could pay the correct price. In other words, we want to affect the yichud. We want to do yichud k'tshbrich shchinta. In other words, you want to create a new soul for yourself, right? That's actually how the Arizal connects the yichud and atzilus to yourself always. Or you want to create a new levush, which is part of the soul, or some helper for the soul, however you want to call it. That's what we want to do. Now, it seems like the Arizal says that there's only two ways that you can do this correctly. Because it seems like we are way too poor to pay the price of that. We're just little, 6'2" people, bundles of flesh and stuff. And that doesn't seem to be enough to affect the Olam Atzilus. I use the language of physical length always and height because it shows you how small you are. Because, you don't even get to the roof of your own house. Like, why are you talking about getting to Olam Atzilus? But it's the same thing if you talk about the concept and the mind and the feelings of a person. They're very small. So basically, for this reason, people in the Arizal's times were kind of understanding that the only way to really give something to God is through martyrdom, through killing yourself, literally. The Bet Yosef had a lifelong dream to die in Kiddush Hashem, to be a martyr. Because maybe then you could say, well, I really gave something to God. I really did something. In other words, I could assume that the price, that's enough, that's a price that's to pay for a yichud. That's halos man. Other option would be maybe if you really know what you're doing, like if you're a real tzaddik and you really like never forgot Shivisi in your life, since you were 3 years old, maybe then you could say, well, with your thoughts, you're giving something, you're doing something. But otherwise, it's just like one big mishmash of nothing. It seems very far-fetched. Anyways, therefore, the Arizal said generally that the only hope we have of doing a yichud ever is by Mesiras Nefesh. And the Arizal kind of said, well, I'm not actually going to ask you to kill yourself, although that might have been the best thing to do. Just don't have the opportunity. Rabbi Akiva said he was waiting for that all his life, people like that. But we're usually not doing that. But there is all this say, and they printed it in all this Siddurim, that every time you do a mitzvah, you should be Mekabel Mesiras Nefesh. So at least in theory, you're ready to give your life. And that would mean, in other words, you're really giving something. You're really, really giving yourself. If you give yourself, then you get yourself back, right? Then you get numach, you get a new neshama. Anyways, how did I get into this whole discussion? So therefore, what I wanted to get to is that all the mitzvahs that we do during the day are kind of half stuff, because we're mostly halfway there, and we mostly halfway know what we're doing. And it works sometimes, right? You could be in a very bad mood and then, you daven or you learn or you do something and you get back your mind, and it works sometimes. I'm not saying that going to sleep is the only thing, but in a certain level, going to sleep is the best thing you can do. Because that's literally saying, I'm going to stop to think, or I don't stop to think when I go to sleep. But I'm going to stop to, have all the control and put myself in the hands of the Shekhinah. So that's literal Mesiras Nefesh. Well, it's only like 1 in 60 of Mesiras Nefesh, right? Like Echad Meshishim B'mis. But it's the most real, it's the most physical, halos man that you can do in your life. Therefore, the best halos man that a human being can do is go to sleep. Eventually we're all going to die, and that will be the halos man for real. And that's why many times going to sleep is the only way to do tshuva, the only way to get a new levush, or the only way to get a new soul, because that's really when you're going to do something. And even if you have the right kavanah when you go to sleep, that's one thing, but it's not really relevant to the kavanah, because kavanah is just the same thing you can do all day, but the action of it is much stronger, is much more real, much more effective than the whatever kavanah you can have in that. So therefore, most of the time, when you're in a bad mood and you go to sleep, you wake up in a better mood, which is another way of saying you got back your soul, or you got a new soul. And that was because you did the biggest mitzvah that you could do, the real tshuva. In other words, the natural, like physical tshuva. Because tshuva means put back your soul where it came from and renew it. So, you can go to the mikveh, which is some kind of thing like that, a symbolic thing like that at least. But you could go to sleep, which is like almost literal like that. Not entirely literal because you're still alive, but almost the closest you can get. And therefore, for example, in the Rashash and the Arizal, the Yichud, there's different levels of Yichudim. The Rashash called this Yichud of Chav Dalet Shes, which is the total Yichud of the entire day. It only happens by going to sleep. There's an Asir and whatever, the whole Seder. But anyways, going to sleep is one of the best things you can do for your soul. Anyways. And then you wake up with a new levush, and then you say a bracha, Hanosen, Layaef, Koach, Malbish, Arumim, all of that. I'm going to try to finish just. וחידוש זה נעשה על ידי שם אל, המסעיר בבריקה בסדר חסד, כמו שכוסף חסד אל כל היום, בסדר ישכם אברהם בבריקה. כמו שבעני על מה שתקני, וברכס יצא מחדש בטבע בכל יום תמיד מעשה ברשס. So the Rizal says now, what kind of Shem, what kind of parts of Sphira, for example, affects this is Chachis? And the answer is Chesed. As we say, Chadoshim Lapchim Rabbim Nesacha, what does it say anything about Chesed there? I don't know. But Chesed, it says Vayashkim Avram Vaykan, and the Shem El is Bechesed. That's generally because we have different Shemes and El, Lehim, and so on. The Shem El relates to Chesed generally, and this Shem later is going to give us an explanation that you can see why he wants it to be this Shem. But there's this Chesed of God which wakes up every morning, as it says V'yashkem Avram B'Vayker, and Avram means the Midas HaChesed, the Sfiras HaChesed, wakes up every morning, no matter you did anything for it or not, and that's what gives you this refreshment, this new levush. Now, I don't know why he says something about the Chesed, the El. I don't see why. Okay. Shem El. As it says in Machadish B'Tiva, I don't know what it says about Machadish B'Tiva either. I think that Rizal's pshat is that every morning there's a chesed of. He says something. Let's see what it says in Bichas Yoitze. Bichas Yoitze, he talks about. Yeah, he discusses this. He talks about if it tuve mechadish b'chol yom masa b'reshes, ve'inyan ki amatz le'elnin mechadish b'chol yom masa b'reshes al det tuva shu ha'chesed. B'sot chadashim l'pkirim sha'chesed mis'ir ha'berker mechadish kivir etzlein b'chas Malbish ve'nis l'nefkach. So you have to be mechadish b'tuva, the chesed, which is the toiv, the goodness, the chesed, kindness, is what refreshes the world every morning, and that also gives you a new song. Okay, I don't know. It doesn't seem to add anything here. This is the kind of things where they send you on a circle. You know, when you're here, he tells you to look there, and when you're there, he tells you to look there, and you don't know. Didn't help. None of them helped. But okay. Yeah, I think there's a pshat in this, but I'm not sure right now what it is. Okay, now I'm just going to tell you quickly this. Maybe we'll get to it again next time. Now, what's this? This is called Malbish. Now, Malbish is what? Malbish is begematria or pnei el. Is it begematria? You could calculate it. I didn't check it. The light of God's face, right? Or pnei el. And in other words, in his understanding, this is the Shem El, the or of the Shem El. This is Malbish. This is when you put on your Malbish, you have to be mechavan that Malbish is or pnei el. It's probably the name of a malach, like Or Paniel. Maybe I shouldn't say it because Arizal doesn't like saying malach. Anyways. Now, generally, the Arizal has this idea that there's 378 lights in the face of Arich. And we're talking about the Pnai El. So the Pnai El is these 378, which is the Sod Chashmal. There's something called Chashmal, and the Makova Vichasna. The Arizal understands Chashmal to be this levush. Just like the Yersola is levush, the Sfiras have levush, which come from Binna, and their Malbish, Tferes, and Malchus. And that's Chashmal is the same gematria, right? Chashmal is also 368 and 78. Yeah, Shimam Lamed Ches. Yeah, that's easy. So that's Chashmal is Malbish. Whenever you put on your Malbish, you have to remember that that's Chashmal. Now, both this Chashmal is comes out of Shem El. How? And this is a very famous common and drash from Darizal. Because Tush El B'Mila is Begematria 370. In other words, if you write Aleph Lamed, that's 370. And with the 8 letters of it, right? How do you have 8 letters? Yes, El Aleph Lamed. That's 6 plus 2. That's 378. Communion Malbish. The Pusik Bevigde Va. So the Savad Meshputim talks about Bevigde Ba, and he reads it as he is enclosed in her. So the Neshama has clothing, or the spirits have clothing. And he explains over there that the levush comes from the Shem Eloah. And Eloah is also another Shem for Chesed. but it's El Vuvhe. So it understands that the Shem El gives the Vuvhe, which is the Sferis and Malchus of Levush. So just like the Sferis Elyonis have a Levush, Hashem has a Levush. So there's these double kavanah like in everything else. So that's the Pshat of Malbish Harimim. And Neslan Yav Koach is if he kind of doesn't explain the kavanah, what's the remez of Neslan Yav Koach, or where you get this Koach from, or anything like that. But Neslan Yav Koach is kind of the same thing when it's in a lesser state, when you just have to. It's just tired, it's just weak, but it's not totally broken. You have to kind of understand what this means, but it doesn't really explain what it means, so we'll leave it at this. Yeah, let us have new clothing.